Introduction to Classical Genetics. From generation to generation, at its heart, classical genetics is the genetics of individuals and their families. It focuses mostly on studying physical traits or phenotypes as a stand-in for the genes that control appearance. Gregor Mendel, a humble monk and part-time scientist, founded the entire discipline of genetics. Mendel was a gardener with an insatiable curiosity to go along with his green thumb. His observations may have been simple, but his conclusions were jaw-droppingly elegant. This man had no access to technology, computers, or a pocket calculator, yet he determined with keen accuracy exactly how inheritance works. Chapter 1. Welcome to Genetics, What's What and Who's Who. Classical genetics is sometimes referred to as Mendelian genetics. You start a new scientific discipline, and it gets named after you. Seems fair. Transmission genetics. This term refers to the fact that classical genetics describes how traits are passed on or transmitted from parents to their offspring. No matter what you call it, classical genetics includes the study of cells and chromosomes, which we cover in chapters 2 and 6. Cell division is the machine that drives inheritance, but you don't have to understand combustion engines to drive a car, right? Likewise, you can dive straight into simple inheritance in chapter 3 and work up to more complicated forms of inheritance in chapter 4 without knowing anything whatsoever about cell division. Mendel didn't know anything about chromosomes and cells when he figured this whole thing out, by the way. The genetics of sex and reproduction are also part of classical genetics. Various combinations of genes and chromosomes, which are strands of DNA, determine sex, as in maleness and femaleness. But the subject of sex gets even more complicated and interesting. The environment plays a role in determining the sex of some organisms, like crocodiles and turtles, and other organisms can even change sex with a change of address. If this has piqued your interest, you can find out all the astonishing details in chapter 6. Of note, we use the term sex throughout this book instead of the term gender. Sex is what defines males and females from a biological perspective. A person's gender, on the other hand, may also be influenced by social and cultural factors and may differ from one's biological sex. Classical genetics provides the framework for many subdisciplines. The study of chromosome disorders such as Down syndrome, which we cover in chapter 13, relies on cell biology and an understanding of what happens during cell division. Genetic counseling, which we cover in chapter 15, also relies on understanding patterns of inheritance to interpret people's medical histories from a genetics perspective. In addition, forensics, covered in chapter 18, uses Mendelian genetics to determine paternity and to work out who's who with DNA fingerprinting. Molecular genetics, DNA and the chemistry of genes. Classical genetics concentrates on studying outward appearances, while the study of actual genes falls under the heady title of molecular genetics. The area of operations for molecular genetics includes all the machinery that runs cells and manufactures the structures called for by the plans found in genes. The focus of